God, Cali, a life-changing thing just happened to me.
Go.
I discovered that HBO Max has all of the seasons of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Oh God. Don't they have that on like a typical streaming like
I don't
Hulu or
know,
something like that?
probably. But they also did this reunion show, which was why I was a little late because I was getting a little verklempt.
Oh. So you're getting all Fresh Princed out, like
Yeah.
you're binge watching Fresh Prince. Of all the shows that I've binge watched, I never thought to binge watch Fresh Prince. I've binge watched, here's my guilty pleasure, Cheers. If you
Oh,
can
yeah,
imagine
that's a good
that.
one. That's a
Yeah.
good one too.
And
I think,
Frasier, I was on like this trajectory of like I had to watch Cheers and then Frasier. It's embarrassing though because it's not even my generation, and yet I find like just they're wearing corduroys, and there's just something so great about
yeah,
the '80s.
that was kind of my generation. In it,
We're like the same age.
yeah, sure. But actually, on Frasier, it was really cool because he was like supposed to be in Seattle,
Yes.
and one year they had an episode that had our mayor on it, Mayor Norm Rice, and it was someone that I kind of knew because my dad worked with him a little bit, and I was just like, I thought it was so cool.
I'm sure that I'm sure I've seen that episode, and it probably was just like because
Yeah,
I had no idea who the mayor was, and I probably just assumed he was just a character. But
yeah.
yes, I mean, there's some nostalgia since it is Seattle. Speaking of Seattle, we are not going to be talking about the department we work for, but we do
No.
work in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes, that's correct.
And we are both police officers. And if you have stumbled upon this podcast accidentally, please don't change your dial. I guess
Don't
it's like,
click a different link.
yeah,
Yeah.
please stay with us. And if you intentionally clicked on this podcast, thank you. This is a new endeavor for myself and Lexi. And so we're hoping that we can share some ideas about leadership and police work, and then hopefully bring in some concepts that have to do with leadership outside of police work as well. So I guess we should introduce ourselves. I'm Cali Hinzman.
The Cheers aficionado.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm Lexi Harris, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air aficionado.
Fanatic.
Yeah.
And we met working in law enforcement, and we basically both came to it relatively late in life. I mean, we're roughly the same age. We're not going to say who's older and who's younger because it's irrelevant. I mean,
If you want to comment.
But we both came into law enforcement around the same time, and so we had like a whole life and career before that, which I think makes us kind of unique. Not to mention it's kind of like a male dominated. I hate throwing that early on. Please don't turn the podcast off if you're turned off by the fact that I just said that, but it is sort of unique, right?
Yep.
And so we've both been in police work for give or take 5 years, I'd say. That's a round number for you. And we met working for our department. I came from a background working for a company, which I still do a bit of a side hustle for, called Power Athlete, where I run a podcast for them. I trained or I coached strength and conditioning for them for quite a while, and had the luxury of traveling the world, teaching people how to move better, specifically working with athletes who had a very specific skill set, be it in their sport or their position. So these are individuals who knew exactly what they were training for. And so we had a lot of fun doing that. And I still have a lot of fun doing that because of its crossover to police work. I mean, we have, for all the crazy things that we do, there are some very specific skill sets that we can train. So it's kind of a natural evolution for me. And it's kind of how we got to know each other, right? Like our passion
absolutely.
for fitness and stuff.
Yeah, because my career prior to law enforcement was also in the fitness industry, not on such a large scale, but I was a personal trainer, and then I also worked in management in corporate gyms. And part of what my role was training those trainers how to not only be good business people, but also how to be better trainers and make sure that their athletes or clients or whoever they had were meeting the goals that they signed up for. So,
which is why you're so patient. Like when we were patrol partners, there were just so many times where I had to do the old handoff to you. You know, it was you know exactly what I'm talking about
Oh
too.
yeah, I would just look at you and I knew that it was getting to the point where I needed to come in because your eyebrows.
Yeah, I know. They'd get to like this super judgy angle and you'd have to stiff arm me out of the way before I said something that I regretted. So that's where you get your patience, because you have been in multiple management positions and have had to manage people and run businesses. And that was like something that I've never had to do. So
Well, and trainers are a lot like cops in that they are very sort of bullheaded and, not exactly very independent, which is great. They should be, but not the easiest people necessarily to manage all the
yeah,
time.
yeah. And like when we met, I think we found a lot of commonality, not just in like our drive for you specifically, like to train combatives, like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and mine and sort of more like just specifically weight room BS. But we both had like a pretty strong work ethic when it came to the physicality of the job, and
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
that definitely like translated into our work ethic for how we approached just like the nuance of everything when it came to tactics, to mindset, to resilience, to like all of these different aspects that come up and were for me they all sort of, as you refine them, they all sort of make you a more well-rounded person in the job and outside the job. Sure, there's like some growing pains there for sure, but
Oh
it's
yeah.
like it's one of the things, like when we started working together, we would run like hypothetical situations in the car, all kinds of stuff like that. We would talk about tactics, and that's how I knew that I was working with someone who I really respected. And I think that was an aspect of leadership in a lot of ways. Like, you displayed to me the type of individual that I wanted to strive to be, and you were elevating me and holding me to a higher standard just on the way that you did your job,
Well, ditto. But I think that also, yes. I think that also just shows like our sort of growth mindset is I never feel in anything fully competent. So to me, it just makes me want to make sure that I'm always asking for advice from other people, and always like, if I have a chance, like to partner with someone like you that, is willing to do the what ifs and the, debriefing calls and that stuff. I always take that chance because I think it's important to know that even if I felt like I did an awesome job, someone else might have some like pointers of, okay, you could have done it better this way, or maybe it
Yeah.
was a little unsafe in this area or whatever. And I'm fully willing, especially when it feels like a give and take.
Yeah.
But, and
And
I
that
think
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that we both had that mind frame. And then that is another aspect of leadership, is just realizing that, you're never going to have all the answers, right?
Right. And that's kind of what I was going to say, is that the job is so complex that you continue to just you just continue to be challenged on a regular basis. There's just no mastering it in like a given amount of time. Like there's people who've been in police work for 30 years that are still being challenged, and they will never see the same call twice. And I think that's one thing that makes like striving for better leadership in police work unique, in that you are held to such a high standard, not only by if you are surrounded by high performing individuals, but also, the society holds you to such a high standard, and there's very little room for error. So, some people would almost say, like, it's at this point in time in our culture, it's a crazy job to have, right? It's just like, you're trying to achieve the unachievable, but there's a core group of people who still feel that the job has there's a lot of noble endeavor to the job. There's a willingness to do something for humanity, et cetera. And you can get all fluffy if you want, but there's also people who just like the challenge or the
Mm-hmm.
adrenaline or what have you. And so yeah, I think police work affords kind of a unique environment to challenge leadership, but it's not the only environment where you sort of see like leaders flourish, or they can cause morale to go down, right? You see that in
Yeah,
business too.
absolutely. I still think like there's really no other career I can think of where you're just going to meet people that you would never meet any other way. And have conversations you never thought you'd have. And,
Yeah.
I really do appreciate that part of the job. It keeps it fun and, new and
Yeah.
for
And
me, yeah.
it's just awesome. It's a very rewarding job, but I can say like especially now there are times where it really doesn't feel rewarding. And I've worked numerous protests, and I have had the fortune, I guess you could say it, the luck of the most perfectly planned, well, not planned,
Timed. It was very well
timed
timed. Yeah.
timed pregnancy, yeah, pregnancy of all time, which just so happened, I was pregnant through as COVID was coming on, and then I was out for when the unfortunate George Floyd incident happened, and the kind of the social uprising that was a result of that when that occurred. And the anti-police and the defunding of police started to really come about. I have still been on maternity leave. So I know that was a huge influence for you wanting to sort of get some sort of semblance of control of, I've got to make an impact. I've got to do something with all of this negativity, because that the job is good. That
Mhm.
people are, on the whole, the people that do this job are intrinsically good people, and particularly in the department that we work for. I mean, and then also, you want to get a message out there and some sort of symbol that, hey, we are not all that, right? We are there. There's individuals in all lines of police work, all departments, that are upstanding people who just want to do good things for the community. So can you talk a little bit about your experience, like from the beginning of the summer when things just started to just derail?
Yeah. So after we were patrol partners, I moved to a squad that was a bike squad. So not the cool vroom vroom kind, but the pedal kind. And we do a lot of work in the downtown core and just, standard proactive stuff. And I really enjoyed just kind of, again, being you don't have the excuse of being in your car. You are out there and you're going to be talking to people, and you're going to be exposed to things you're not when you're in your vehicle and that kind of thing. And I really, that was my favorite part of that.
And I think it's worth mentioning too that we work nights.
Yes. Yeah. We work night times
It's a
downtown.
different, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not all just giving directions to,
Or
target.
taking, yeah, paper reports or anything. I
Right.
mean, it's pretty, it can be very slow, but it
Sure.
mostly is very fast paced. Call to call. There's always something to be found.
It's also why I look so haggard too, is like the nights tend to take a toll,
We're
on
actually
the
just
body.
19. Yeah. We said we were old, but
we age in dog years.
Yeah, the nights definitely were taking a toll on me even before the protests. But pardon me. But yeah, so we use the bikes as crowd control when we have protests, and we have traditionally had protests year round in our city, and to varying degrees of I guess animosity. I mean, some of them are really easy to deal with, and people are thanking you for being there. You're helping them to not get hit by cars or whatever it might be, or get to the destination on a march. And then sometimes you're standing in between two armed groups that don't like each other,
Yeah.
and you are literally standing between that, and it's a very odd thing. But we dealt with it for quite a long time very effectively, with not. I hadn't had anything really large happen on my times on bikes. I had some people on my team that were there during the Ferguson stuff, and they had told me how nonstop it was and how different. But I hadn't experienced anything like that until the George Floyd incident. And the first night we got just completely, we were not prepared for it. We were out there in our polo shirts and shorts, and at the first little moment we were the only team out there, and there was just hundreds of people throwing things, pushing us, setting fire.
I think you sent me a picture either from that night or that weekend. It's probably towards the end of that weekend, of you finally getting a chance to put your feet up in a bathtub, and you took a picture of your legs, which were covered in bruises and scrapes and like contusion, like little contusions and stuff. And I just
Mhm.
was like, my heart was just like, it just went out to you because I knew that you were just dealing with so much at that time.
I think we were prepared, but just because what was going on in the nation, we were prepared for something big, but I don't know that any of us had wrapped our minds around just, how bad it was going to get, how quickly, and that, relatively small amount of people that first night, who were throwing things at us and setting fires and destroying stores. They kept saying, "We'll see you tomorrow,"
Mm-hmm.
and we knew that there was going to be something large the next day. So then the next day came, and it started off fine. It was kind of your standard speech and march, and the funny thing is, like, all of us were in agreement that that should never have happened, that it's nothing that we train.
And by that you mean what happened to
What
George
happened to George
Floyd?
Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
It's nothing that we train. It's nothing that we could. It just, we were all standing there like, yeah, we are in
Yeah,
agreement, we're
everyone
here.
was
Yeah.
appalled. Yeah.
um as the night went on, it did not stay nonviolent.
Mm-hmm.
At one point I was standing on a line, and on the radio traffic was insane. Rifle stolen from a police vehicle, shots heard from that rifle, thousands of people on the freeway, which is very atypical, because that's something we really try to avoid just due to
Mm-hmm.
the danger.
Yeah, that's kind of a threshold, like in terms of when we brief protests and things like that. Like
Yeah.
it's never supposed to get that far.
Yeah.
So that's a big
So
deal.
you're hearing these things, and you're hearing like rocks and bottles, and there are different things happening, and it's just like, oh my God. And I'm looking in front of me at all these people, and then I look behind me, and there's another line of officers, and we're completely surrounded by just thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And it just sort of devolved from there. There was a lot of fires. There was a lot of looting that night. I mean, to the point where there's so many stores being looted, like literally cars driving into the storefronts, loading up
Yeah.
as much as they could, and driving away, that we tried to address what we could. But I mean,
Yeah.
we would watch people walk by us with, hey, that's a nice backpack you got there. But, and it was insane. I don't think I can ever really explain just how insane it
No.
was. And unfortunately, it didn't die down from there. It just continued for, I feel like, about a month. We were trying to protect infrastructure, and it didn't work out. And, it just, it was a tough time. I think I clocked like over 100 hours of overtime on one paycheck, just from how much we were working. And you just keep showing up, and you keep doing it, and you figure it's gonna end at some point.
Yeah.
And eventually, and we were still dealing with it to a certain extent to this day, but it's just not. It's obviously not as violent as it was. But yeah, during that time was certainly when I, like you said, felt like I can't just complain about whatever's going on, whatever lack of, messaging or lack of leadership that I thought I saw. I wanted to do something to give back, or to, make an impactful change. And so
Yeah.
the idea of Ura and the company that we're now going forward with started at that time. Just I think, to keep me sane, of
Sure.
like,
Yeah, of course.
yeah, like, what can I do? What can I change? It's not complaining. It's not just coming to work and doing
Yeah.
this, but actually, like, giving back or making an impact, or
Yeah, and
changing it.
I mean, as long as I've known you, that's who you are. You're not a person to just complain. Your thought is, okay, you tell me it's raining now, like let's get an umbrella. Like, it's, we're not just going to stand out here and let it rain on us. That's always been your personality. And you said something earlier about how, when you were talking about your overtime and everything, and like you just kind of just keep showing up. And but that's the thing, is not everyone just kept showing up. A lot of people left, right? Like a lot of people left. And I think we should just say, like, well, first of all, I can't speak to it because I wasn't there. But man, we really, you can't blame those people, right? Like
Not at all.
you experienced it, and
Yeah.
just because you're still in this line of work, you're still with the same department, that was your personal choice because you were like, I'm not done here. I'm gonna keep wringing out this wash rag till I can like say, so I can say I did everything. But a lot of people have left. And what do you think, aside from the obvious of just kind of like the stress, because some people have left law enforcement altogether, but
Yep.
do you think that there's anything that like people in positions of leadership or the people that have lateraled away from our department, do you think there's anything that leadership could have done differently?
I think on various levels. I mean, from city leadership
Sure.
to departmental leadership. I mean, it just I would say more with the city and also the media, but you can't really count that in our.
Sure.
Right? You kind of have to just know that that's not going to be in your favor mostly.
Yeah.
But it's this feeling of just not being supported, I think. So, I mean, I was lucky to work for people that I felt supported by, and I felt like, had the confidence that, too shall pass.
How
And
did you feel like you gained support from them?
I think a lot of it is just knowing that they believe in me, and that, they were, forcing me at times to take days off because
Mm-hmm.
I don't have young children at home, and a lot of people on my team did. So I felt like, let them take the days first. And, as time went on, having a leadership structure that was thinking a little bit outside of the box as far as how to deal with the
Mm-hmm.
issues we were coming by, and really saying like, we want you guys to work. We don't want you to feel hamstrung. We support you. Here's some parameters. Like, let's try this, and not feeling
Right.
like we're just like banging our head against the wall doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Right.
To me, that was very helpful.
Yeah. And I think
And
that leadership though, those specifically those leaders that you're referring to, they kind of lay that foundation before it was too late, right? Like that was their demeanor, and that's how they approached their position in the chain of command before they needed to. And
absolutely.
I think that says a lot about like it's a sense of authenticity and a sense of like them taking a vested interest in their people, not just like a knee-jerk reaction like, oh yeah, suddenly we care about you, and like, what is it you guys want to do, like who needs
Yeah.
days off, we'll try to work it out, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, they were definitely proactive. And even before everything started, like, there was a level of trust in my chain of command that I knew that, they were, they cared about me and my
Yeah.
fellow workers, and same with the people I worked with that,
Yeah. And I know
yeah.
we've talked about how one of the ways that the leaders that have been the most impactful for us have showed that they cared was kind of like pulling us aside and asking us like, hey, what are our goals, right? Like taking a vested interest in first and foremost knowing what our goals are, so it's like kind of in the back of their head and on their radar, and then also just like genuinely trying to, with their expertise and their experience, putting together like a game plan to sort of like
Mhm.
get headed in that direction, right? Like I know that happened with me, and same thing happened with you, and
Mhm.
I think that that speaks volumes of people as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Just what's your 5-year plan, and
Hmm.
how can I help you realistically get there, or get the experience you need to get there? And just being asked that question, A, forces you to think about it, and B, just shows that you have someone kind of in your corner,
Hmm.
working
And
to help you out.
C, which I know we've talked about, and C, which is part C1, which is like once you tell someone like what your plan is, or number one, it kind of forces you to think like, oh, like I'm not just living day to day at this job that I really like. I should probably be thinking about when, my knees are shit, or like, I don't feel like working nights anymore. Like, what's my plan going to be?
Yeah.
Part C2 is, are you following me? Are you with
I'm
me?
following. C, we're on 2, right?
We're on
C2
C2
or
is
CB.
C2, C Roman numeral 2, part A is like once you vocalize to someone what it is that you're trying to accomplish, especially to someone that's somewhat of an authority figure, like someone that maybe you look up to or is a leader in some capacity for you, you sort of then you sort of feel like you got to follow through with it, right? Like you sort of don't want to let that person down, which was my experience, was like, okay, now I vocalized it.
Yeah.
And there's an expectation now that I am going to like bust my ass to try to get to that spot,
or
right?
or if you're given an opportunity based on those conversations, you want to make sure that you hit it out of the ballpark, right? That you
Right.
don't just half-ass it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting little like nuance to like those little conversations, which I only kind of came to that realization. Like when I'm looking back at it, like retroactively, I'm like, oh, like that's why, that's why I put so much effort into XYZ training is like part of it is just like a genuine interest. And then the other half of it is like, I got to put my money where my mouth is. I can't just sit and let these opportunities pass me by.
Yeah.
So can you speak in like in slightly more specifics, any good, bad leadership things that come to mind in this like current environment or just in general? I mean, you can just like shoot the shit with things that come to mind.
Well, I think if we're talking specifically about, the riots and the protests
Mhm.
and stuff, there are certainly times where you'd be out there and a certain, command staff person would come on the radio and there would just be this like collective sigh of relief,
Mhm.
almost like they rode in on a white cloud or a white horse,
Yeah.
and you just are like, oh, thank God we're going to
And
be
don't you
okay.
want to be that person? Like that's like my
Yeah.
goal is like I want to be that person like who comes on the radio and everyone is relieved. Like
Yep.
that's my goal,
Yeah, and that is for officers too, right? Just on a normal
Yeah, oh
call,
yeah.
you definitely have those people that show up, and you're like, okay, good, this will all turn out perfect,
Yeah.
and then there's people that have the opposite effect of just anxiety, or things might get more elevated than they need to, or more confusing, or you know, um,
Yeah.
and on a sort of a normal call where you have less people and you're just trying to deal with one or two things, it's a lot easier to mitigate like a bad leader, because
Sure.
you can kind of manage up a little bit better. But when you're standing on line with thousands and thousands of people in front of you, there's really only one thing you can do, and that's just follow whatever the command that comes over the radio, because you have to work as a team, and
Yeah.
and you're dealing with just the most massive thing that you could even think of. It's just like mind blowing, the things that we see. We still go through certain areas, and we'll be driving through and just like, hey, do you remember when this was on
Ugh.
fire? You remember when that guy just all of a sudden fell in our arms with
Yeah.
a stab wound? Yeah, that happened right here. It's just like you can't travel through those areas without
Mhm.
kind of, and luckily I think we all do it with a light heart at this point. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, and like just like as an aside, someone that you and I know mutually who outranks us, we'll always talk about like WTO, those protests when that like you lived in Seattle around that time. But what year was that? Do you remember?
hey, no,
I'm just curious. I'm
you're
just
trying to
curious.
win the little poll on the bottom. I see.
No, no, not at all. I mean, what were you? You were like 25,
Oh, okay,
30?
yes.
No, I'm
No,
just kidding.
I was around 17, and I
Okay.
actually did go down to WTO, and
Yeah, I wasn't trying to pull
yeah,
you into that,
no, that's okay.
but my point of this is the guy that we mutually know always talked about WTO as being kind of like the epitome of like the most crazy protest ever. And I was recently talking to him and I said, "So how did this compare to WTO?" And he told me no comparison. This was by far way more violent, way more violent. And like WTO to some of the old timers was like the fucking Super Bowl of
Yeah,
protests, right? And so to hear that, it just puts things in perspective for someone like myself who was not there to experience this, and for people who really maybe are not getting the full picture of just how violent things were.
yeah, and I think that was probably one of the frustrating things for us, is we'd go home, get 2 hours, 3 hours of sleep, come back, and then there'd be a news report on telling like how terrible we were and how great the protests were. And then, you know, to be fair, there were plenty of protests in different areas of the city that were massive and that went off without a flaw.
Right.
Like there was no issues. You know, we monitored from afar maybe,
Right.
but and those were beautiful, and those I think were great,
Right.
and they were great for people to have those voices. But it certainly wasn't we were what we were experiencing downtown, and so that was also huge morale, just
Yeah.
kick in the
Torture.
butt. Yeah.
You said something earlier too about, well, what we were talking about good and bad leadership and how, certain people in command, you kind of like it adds to the anxiety and some people not so much. And then you mentioned it's the same thing with officers, right? And I think that that goes back to one of our philosophies, which is that really like leadership has nothing to do with rank.
Absolutely.
Rank is just like a title, but as Matt, Italian last name, who we're going to have on the podcast, no one, not even his mother can pronounce his last name properly. But yeah, just like how he says, like, I think he said leadership is not about rank, it's about influence. And that's exactly right. And so, I mean, I could not agree more when it comes to I think that's one of our main goals, is that you don't have to wait for someone in command to start to exhibit the leadership qualities and characteristics that you want to see embedded in the culture of police work, right? That starts with us. And
Yep.
that's basically why we're doing this. And kind of like it starts with you, anybody who's listening, right? So it really, it's not confined to police work, but this is what is important to us right now. And so that's kind of why we're a voice for hopefully elevating those people that are even just at the officer level.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I can speak from personal experience. I mean, I have no idea if people have looked at me and thought, you know, I want to be that type of officer, but I have certainly looked at officers I've worked with or near and said, I want to be that type of officer.
Oh, yeah.
Like how they are on scene with people they're talking to, how they do their investigations afterwards, how they, you know all the policy and know the laws and, work within them and are very measured. And, different people have different qualities, but, or just like the extreme morality of some of the officers I work with, just like they do the right thing, even when it's a hard thing to do,
Yeah.
even when it might be like, well, I have to call out another officer, but they do it, and there's plenty of examples that I've seen of that I always wonder, like, put in the same situation, would I do that? But having seen them do it, it's like,
you
okay,
you
yes.
would. Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's whether I would just through my nature or because I've seen it modeled.
Right. And yeah, it's admirable. And it just, it makes me think about like, the strength and conditioning adage. Like if you're the strongest person in the gym, you need to find another gym, right? If you're the most thorough officer that you need to know, then you need to go to a different squad. You need to find other people that are going to check you, because there's no way you're anywhere near your capacity for like ability in all functions of the job in law enforcement, right? So yeah, I mean I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. And it's a never ending thing. And that's kind of one of the cool things about law enforcement too, is like you could spend 20 years in this career and then have a call that you have never done before because it's just so unique, or, doesn't happen all that often. And it's just the first time you've had to deal with it. And, so your skill sets you've built up over those 20 years or however many will help you, but you can't really assume that you're going to see the same thing over and over again. So
yeah. And I mean, we're talking specifically about like leadership as it pertains to kind of like the function of working within the department, but there's so much more. There's our interaction with the community, which, I mean, I know that you're a native of where we work, and we both have done community projects, whether it's worked with the youth or you worked with coaches and things like that. And I just, I think it's important. I'm not sure if society still perceives us as leaders. Like, do the kids still want to get stickers from us? Do they still want us to turn their lights on for them at intersections, to make them smile? Like, oh, this is like hurting my heart. But like, I don't know.
I was specifically told a couple nights ago not to wave at someone's children. So But I mean, that's sort
Right.
of atypical. But there's
Oh yeah.
certainly lots of examples of people that are still, want to talk to us, and you know, we get like, not all of us hate you, or whatever. But honestly, like, separating from like the protests and just dealing with the day-to-day stuff, like the people that I dealt with before all this are still the same people, and they're still cool to talk to, and they're still respectful, and they still are doing what they were doing before. And I mean, it is sort of refreshing in a way to get back to normal police work, because you realize, like, that's just so separate from everything that was going on. And really, you mentioned the coaches, like, we're gonna hopefully have them on the podcast shortly, but they came about just out of this, like, sort of the same, like, burning desire to want to do something that would give back to law enforcement. I had a burning desire to talk to people that were actually stakeholders in the community, and because I still believe that it wasn't necessarily representative of the hate that I was seeing and getting, and of like the actual community. So, like, trying to find those opportunities to talk to people, and have like deep, meaningful conversations was
I can
huge.
hear your dog snoring. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Are we
Enzo.
boring you? I'm so sorry, Norm.
No, that I think that one's Enzo,
Oh.
but I'll throw something at him. Shut up.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, like, that's part of why we think this is such a worthy endeavor, is because we do think that there's a lot of work to be done between rebuilding the trust with the community and and continuing that dialogue. I mean, but the thing is, there has to be this conversation. We hope to bring on a lot of community members who have some insight into leadership, and then have some insight into their experiences with law enforcement.
Absolutely.
And how can we get back to a point where there is that trust, and there is that that consideration that law enforcement really are, we're in community service. That's what we do. We're and so in that respect, I do think we are leaders. We're responding to emergency situations. We're stepping up to the call. But for a myriad of reasons right now, we're not viewed in the light as leaders. So hopefully we can get back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to take some work for us, as individuals, and
Oh yeah.
as departments, just sort of generally, across the nation. And unfortunately, I mean, you mentioned, like, we are experiencing a huge exodus of officers, which
Mhm.
means less people on the street, which means going to call to call to call, being stretched really thin. So it makes it very hard to have those times in between, to have those genuine interactions with the community. So we're gonna have to figure out how to make that up, and if that's something I have to do on my own time, I'm like perfectly willing to do that.
Yeah.
But I know that that's not everybody, because a lot of people have young families and things that take priority in their own lives. So
Just
it's
get rid of your family. It's easy. Just don't go home. Stay awake for 24 hours a day. Dedicate your life to service of others. I don't.
the divorce rate in law enforcement will just,
It's 100%. I'm told. I don't know. I'll let you know.
Well, that's the trick, is you just never get married in the first place. You just stay engaged for
Stay engaged.
years. Yeah.
Oh, that's what the trick is. Okay, you're so smart. What happened to your finger, by the way?
I was
Can
trying to
you?
open up a package.
Oh, I was like, can you talk about it on?
No, it's dumb. I actually scraped myself with my own fingernail. So.
So do you think there's anything else that, I mean, we know that this podcast is a work in progress, but we have we have very lofty goals, and
Yes.
there's no question in my mind that our motivation and our heart is behind this project. And I know that we're going to see some exciting guests and have some pretty interesting conversations, and hopefully do like our tiny part to create some sort of change, at least show police work, police officers in a different light as well, not just the one that you're constantly fed in the media.
Oh, absolutely. I think so. What we really want to do with this podcast specifically is bring in voices that have had a lot of experience with leadership in law enforcement, maybe have kind of thought outside of the box
Mm-hmm.
than your traditional leadership roles. And then also we'd like to bring in people that aren't from law enforcement,
Right.
that have some insight, whether they're thought leaders or CEOs or coaches in communities. We really want to talk to anybody who has that leadership mindset, that growth mindset, and give those different perspectives, because it can help you think outside of the box as well. So
Yeah, and I know we've mentioned this before, but I just think that, you know, law enforcement, like even if you're not a cop, you're not interested in police work, you're like, this shit is boring that I'm listening to right now. I still think there's a lot you can glean from this line of work, because it is it's a very potent environment for how leadership can truly impact the culture. And it is something that we can see right now, right in front of our face. And so if you can see it in the petri dish that is police work, then you can derive a lot of knowledge just from that, just from kind of looking at police work under the microscope, and take it back to whatever your line of work is.
Oh, absolutely. And it's just so high stakes,
Exactly. Yep.
There's, you make a mistake, it can be nothing, but it can mean a lot as well. So I think it has that, well, that sense of responsibility, but also just, it can start to fall apart a lot quicker.
Maybe that's our podcast name, High Stakes.
High stakes. I like it.
I like it. It sounds like an Ocean's 11-esque like movie thing.
It also makes me hungry.
High stakes, STAEAKS. It's actually steaks laced with like CBD.
There you go. I feel sponsors coming on like right now.
Oh God. I think that might be a conflict of interest. So if anybody, should we do the type 1A, 2? Okay. If anybody wants to send us like any hate emails, or they have
that would be to Cali Hinzman.
Yeah. If anybody wants to get in touch with us, how should they do that? Through the internet?
Yes, that thing, right? Yeah. So they can visit our website, which is www.ura, which is spelled IURA LLC. So www.urallc.com.
Which is Latin for law or rule.
Yeah, law, order, natural laws, sort of, one of those Latin words that has a lot of derivatives, but jury is a derivative of jury, or vice versa. And on that website, there's a contact us, but we also both have emails, c.hinzman@ura.llc.com or l.harris@ura.llc.com. We have Instagram, also Ura LLC. Yeah. And really, that's the only one that I'm keeping updated right now, because I'm not a big fan of the other platforms.
Yeah. But, and when this ends up on YouTube, I don't know if I'm going to just lay it all out there and allow comments, because YouTube commenters are straight vicious. They are seriously no holds bar, like the most trolly troll of all time. So, I mean, you're probably like, Cali, I just got done doing like 6 months of protests. I think I can handle it.
Oh, no, I'm sure
I got soft.
I have to check my emotions at many times on some comments I see and take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Because it's,
no haters. No
haters.
Well, I think that pretty much encompasses how they can get in touch with us. And thanks to everybody who stumbled upon this podcast mistakenly. Thanks. If you fell asleep in the middle of it, also thank you. It's still considered a viewing. So, stay tuned for the next one, when we are going to have some of our guests that we've scheduled and have some good conversation about leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Cali.